Our guild has an intro to hard mode operations team starting up, so we're going to talk through a couple progression topics, starting with rotations. That and more on this episode of the Escape Podcast for Star Wars: The Old Republic. Our broadcast astromech today is EPC 376. And playing alongside me is Seema. Hi, Seema. How's it going?
It's going great. How are these going with you, Max?
Great. Thanks for asking.
I finished that book I've been reading called Axiom's End, which I mentioned before. It's a sort of a first contact kind of story. And even though the setting of it is like mid-2000s, well, by mid-2000s, I mean like 2005, America, and includes like conspiracy theorists and the CIA and political powers, it's really more about, and I dig this, it's really more about the question of whether it's possible for one species to know another species. I mean, is it more than learning their language, or is learning their language even possible? And the alien species in the book has this very well worked out culture, social structure, multiple levels of language that you learn in bits and pieces throughout the whole book. So it's really like some kind of incredible world building, even though you never actually go to the world.
Clever. I like
Yeah. And it's ultimately about whether or not this one human and this one alien can connect on any meaningful level. And there's a story and things happen, but that is the driver, and what drives the ending and everything. So some serious world building, and even though if there's not a lot of hard science, it's kind of a throwback to older sci-fi in terms of theorizing about what could be and then fleshing that out. It's kind of curious. I read part of an interview with her, the author, and she said, because they commented to her that there's not much hard science, and she said that basically aliens are like fantasy creatures. They're like trolls and orcs. It is fantasy. So I thought that was an interesting take.
Yeah, that is also interesting.
So I recommend it. However, I think if you are in a position where you could read the book on paper, might prefer to do that, because for me, the reader was pretty off-putting. She's good, she's talented, but she was just so dramatic all the time, and I can't be on that road. It can't be high pitched the whole way through. I want the ups and downs and the nuances.
Right. This whole concept of language and how it relates reminds me of the movie Arrival, which had a really interesting interplay of what it meant to understand the alien language and what it did to your perception of the universe ultimately for the person that was the main character. So another really cool twist on that. I like it. And then also in language, I just wanted to say omitopi. And I do have a deep connection to Rhodians as a result of learning their language. So there's that. So what else have you been doing?
I do normal SWTOR stuff. We had MFN on Tuesday night, like we normally do. We had our ops team tonight, where we went to, we had a couple people missing, so we went to Ravagers and did that on story mode, which was a cakewalk. About halfway through, one of Guildies was saying, anybody have a need for anyone? So we pulled him into our group, Quirkus, and we finished off Ravagers. And then we went and took a look at Nightmare Mode Nephra, which we've done before. We've killed her before, but we didn't have our act together tonight for it. And then we finished up in Tomorrow's Courtyard, because it's always fun to actually kill something after you've wiped a few times on something. So it was a fun night. I've also been doing my normal conquest stuff. I'm steadily on my way to 2 billion credits. I'm like 3/4 of the way between 1 billion and 2 billion. Max.
Nice. Trace Momas.
I see you're I can tell you're looking at chat.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
What are you doing? You said something credits. We got a chat room conversation going on here. Yeah, sounds good, Seema.
But
and
basically, I'm just selling stuff from Conquest, really. I mean, and I still have a really big backlog, like 2,000
oh yeah,
of the solid matrix things. I've
the
sold all my
surrounds.
invasion forces and all my encryption, so now each week I'm just selling the ones that I get from Conquest.
See, I still have a
Um,
backlog. I should go through and sell a bunch more still.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they're the prices are not falling. I don't know why. I mean, even in this last set of changes to Conquest, with making it so easy, but people are still buying the stuff. Um, yeah, so credits, and people are talking about spending their credits. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm just, I'm just doing this it's keeping this score, man.
right.
I don't know. It's like getting rep or something. You just like to see the numbers going up.
Yeah, you get on a grind, or you're set sort of set that mental goal for yourself, and it's a thing. You know, it's sort of self-created content, and
Yeah,
it's a in a little tiny way, it's kind of a sandboxy thing to do. You've decided that you are now
yeah,
a training empire, and you're just gonna accumulate
right.
wealth, and it's
And
not
I'm
the
not doing anybody else's method, I'm just doing what appeals to me,
and there's no
and I
achievement at the end of it. There's no,
right,
it's just something you want to do and you do it.
and I only do it, like, once a week, and it's kind of funny it's kind of fun because then a couple days later, I think, "Oh, I should log in my character that put all those auctions up and see if there's anything waiting for me in the mail. Oh, look, there is 60,000,000 credits. It's
Yeah.
nice."
Yeah,
A
and
little
it's a hit. It's an endorphin hit and it
yeah, it's a
works.
little
Yeah.
perk me up. Yeah. So, yes, I recommend it. Sell your conquest stuff.
Sell it.
Alright. Your turn, Max. What's up with you?
I've completely switched over to Apex Predator. In fact, if you're listening to this weekend, Kai Zyken has the Apex Predator belt, which happened to be the seventh piece I needed. I still had the piece bonus before that. This now completes the set completely for me, which is kind of fun because now I can switch my helmet, my headpiece, over to Amplified Champion, which I prefer rather than the belt, which I have right now. But in doing that, I also spent time this week to build out a second copy of my guns because I wanted to keep the amplifiers and the setup I had for my concentrated fire innovative ordnance set. So I put these guns together, and I went and got myself an additional new tuning, this weapon tuning, to tell them apart just a little bit. I still like weapons on fire, and I like this weapon tuning. So this is the I believe it's called the incinerator weapon tuning.
It is nice, yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is called what that. Yeah, the incinerator weapon tuning. If you look, it might be a little bit hard to see on the stream, but you should be able to see it. It's got a really nice heat distortion uh, uh, graphical effect coming out of it, which is really kind of cool. I mean, it's an advanced graphical effect. And then if you look at the actual flame coming out of it, it's kind of like a blowtorch. If you ever used a blowtorch, which I have many times, both in the kitchen and in plumbing. I have done a lot of plumbing work in my days. When you draw the weapons, there's a little bit of a sound of the whoosh, and there's a spark and the whoosh of the gas igniting, and then you've got the little blowtorch and the heat, this distortion coming off of it. Cool little tuning. I also rolled some amplifiers on that, so they are set up. I've got one as the 2.5%, the top amplifier. The second one's still at a purple
How did you get
2.2.
that tuning?
I bought it with cartel coins. I had some extra cartel coins because it was
Gotcha.
like 300 million on the GTN. I was gonna buy it off of there, but
Yeah, can't pay the 300,000,000.
yeah, and I haven't been buying anything with cartel coins for a long time now, so I
And
had a
your
bunch.
pixel numbers would go down.
It wasn't even it wasn't even a third of what I've still banked in cartel coins just on the monthly stuff. So yeah, so I got it, and I guess it also looks really cool on lightsabers too. It basically adds a little bit of a jet of flame and heat distortion around the hilt. So not really the flames part of it. Doesn't change the color, but it adds like the whatever the color of your blade is, it adds some of that heat distortion around and makes the edge, the ring of the opening of your blade glow red. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, so now I've got a a tuned up set. I've got all my amplifiers mostly tuned up, not 100%. I got my accuracy to 1590, so it's exact, it's perfect. So if we do another one of these series on gearing, we'll talk about about some of this kind of stuff like min max and perfect gearing. So now my accuracy is perfect. My alacrity is not perfect but close. I think my alacrity is 26 points that exceed the limit I need for the 1.3 global cooldown. But I'll eat that. That's fine. So I'm feeling good, and boy, do I like Arsenal. I didn't think I
Mm.
would, and I've been doing a little bit of parsing. I'm parsing really well because the fights that we're doing have a lot of target switching, like hard mode Styrac. So a hard mode Styrac, which we downed last week, you're constantly throughout all that fight, go shoot this thing, go shoot this force ghost. Oh, now you got to shoot the guy in the middle because we've got the chained manifestations. Now you got to shoot your companion. Now you got to shoot the Kel Dragon. By the time I would lay down the dots, and which is the whole point, and what you're buffing with with all the amplifiers and everything for that IO build, they'd barely tick and they were all wasted. Arsenal is just so fun to just like bam, 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 burst. I can like hold back a little bit and I can burst the heck out of stuff, and it's I'm really getting a kick out of it. So it's feeling really good, and a lot of the fights really. So what did we do? We just did story mode Ravagers tonight. Doing Sparky. Shoot a dog, fine. Blow up the dog. Shoot this dog. Shoot 5 dogs. Switch back and forth and shoot all the dogs. Whatever. Shoot Pearl. Shoot Cortani. Sounds good. I will switch as many times as you want. So it's cool.
You're free, free,
I
free
am
from the dots.
unchained. Arsenal shall set you free. So yeah, I'm having fun with that, and I'm also having fun reading the news.
Now, an Imperial News Network report.
First up in the news, they continue to do work on Galactic Seasons. So if you notice, we are not talking about Galactic Seasons tonight. I think we're going to let it bake a little bit. We're going to let it evolve a little bit. They are looking hard at the feedback. So get on there on the PTS, give them the feedback to Galactic Seasons. See if you can divine the intent of what they're trying to do there, and how they've tuned it up and how they've fixed some of the interface things that they had just sort of like hinted at to start. They put a post up with all of the changes that they made so far, and you can get on the PTS and try it out. I recommend you do that if you're interested in that kind of system. And maybe once it's all sort of a little bit more baked, or maybe we'll wait till after it's released or something. We'll get to it eventually, but I'm not mentally all the way there yet, and even in getting it all or having a coherent statement on it just yet. And when we do,
It's
we'll
still a
talk about
moving
it.
target.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, in a good way.
Any
So that
any
means there's a lot of
yeah,
opportunity for you to provide feedback. So go do that.
yeah. And speaking of things that you can provide feedback on, is master mode version of the new Flashpoint is up on the PTS, so that is available for your master mode pleasure enclave
Secrets
master
of the
mode.
Enclave, follow in the footsteps of Malgus. Yes, please. I want that. You saw us do that last week? Did we do that last week? Last week or the week before, we did our walkthrough of it. No story parts of it because those aren't in yet. I'm ready. I'm ready for the story parts. I'm ready to get back in there. I like that place. And sure, we'll do it on master mode. Sounds good to me. Thon will want to do it for sure. Get some achievements. In guild and community news, what do we got that's going on Fridays in general, and specifically tomorrow night? Tomorrow
All
night.
right,
Yeah, what's up?
yeah. So we're still doing MFN on Tuesdays, but now we have nailed down an actual schedule and rotation for Friday nights. So first week of the month, Master Mode Flashpoints. Second Friday of the month, Hard Mode Ops training, and that is this week. So
Yeah.
tomorrow night, or almost in 11 minutes for me, it'll be tonight. But anyway, Friday night, the 9th of April, Hard Mode Ops training. Then the third Friday of the month will be the achievements night, and the fourth Friday of the month will be mega. And then if there is a fifth Friday in any particular month, that will be a wild card or a break or whatever. We'll figure that out when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, so tomorrow's the first of once per month of that hard mode ops team. Marcus, who's in the chat room right now, hey Marcus, is going to be leading that group. Looks like they've already got 8 people together, first come first serve. Going to be focused on, hey, if you've never done hard modes and you want to see what it's like, you want to learn a little bit about what it's like to do a hard mode, get in here. You'll have people to sort of walk you through it. You'll get to try it out. You may spend a night wiping on a boss, but that's part of progression, and you get the feel of that too. And that's kind of why we're doing this first episode tonight, and maybe a couple more in a series like this. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of these topics, which fits into the kind of things you need to think about if you're going to get into progression. So tonight, we're
That
going to talk
reminds
about
me
rotations. Yeah.
of a skill we don't have in our notes that you need for progression rating, which is you need to fine tune your ability to hit rocket boost right when the cooldown is off so you can arrive back from a wipe before your
I
colleagues.
I did. I noped out a Nightmare Nephra one time tonight with double rocket out. Noped right out of there. Said, "See ya, suckers!" And I ran out to the door. And
Well, no,
I lived.
I meant when you're running back from a wipe so that you arrive back for the next attempt.
Oh, yeah.
Before you're
They'll wait for me.
because rocket boost won't be up while you're still in the middle of a wipe.
Yeah, I noped.
Well, that's a cool little chair.
That is a nice chair. It is a nice hover chair. It's sort of an advanced style. So yeah, we'll maybe do a couple other in this series if we get to it, if we remember, and maybe do gearing for hard mode. What does it really mean to min max a little bit? What does that get you? Maybe we'll do a little bit on the how do you learn the mechanics of a fight. And in fact on it, Seema and I had a side conversation today all about threat and how threat works in Star Wars and how it's different than other MMOs and the interplay of threat between the healers and DPS and tanks, and why in the harder modes it becomes more and more important. You get into master mode when you have a really tight DPS timer, and well, here I'm giving away the show. We'll get to that. Yeah, there's a lot of those interesting advanced topics. So that's the kind of thing that Marcus is going to be talking about on the Friday nights, and maybe we'll put a little some extra notes out there that everybody can get to too, or get informed by what they do, and we'll bring it to the show. Also in guild news, I wanted to do a little bit of a call out on the stuff that we've got going on in Alea Iacta Est, our guild, aie-guild.org. So each of our major MMOs has a section in Discord. There's one for Final Fantasy and Elder Scrolls and Guild Wars and Star Trek Online and Star Wars: The Old Republic, of course, World of Warcraft, where we have literally, I think we still have 6,000 characters, and we clear them out once every few months for anyone that haven't played in a few months. So that's quite big. But we've got a section in there up near the top called Nomads. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go check that out. That's a place in our guild, and that I even heard a couple people in the guild saying, "Hey, wait, what's that? You guys are playing Valheim?" It's like, yeah, we're playing Valheim. Check out Nomads. Check out the Nomads channel. Under there, we will sometimes put a dedicated channel for a game if we happen to be playing it. If not, we may just be talking about it in Nomads. It could be other Star Wars games. We did Rogue Squadron. It could be Think Game. We just had a little Valheim night, and we've got a Valheim server that's pinned with an IP address in the Valheim channel. I've been doing, and I did a little write-up on my secondary game outside Star Wars this week has been No Man's Sky. I've been back in there with their Expeditions release, which I really like, and that's what gave me an idea for what Star Wars could do in 2022. That if you're around in the post show, I'll spill the beans on my design idea for that I'm going to give to BioWare, which they can't and won't implement. But anyway, I'll tell you about that in the post show. But yeah, join our Discord, check out that Nomads channel, and come play with us and some of that other stuff. Outriders is going on the side right now. We've got some people that still play Fallout 76. You want to come do multiplayer stuff in No Man's Sky? I'm probably going to be doing a little bit this weekend in between Star Wars stuff. So yeah, and don't forget, under that falls under there also our board games, tabletop games once every 2 weeks, and our D&D groups, which we have multiple on that are running every couple weeks, but ends up having stuff going on with our DMs almost every weekend. So cool. There you go. And certainly shout out to the chat room. We got a bunch of people in there tonight. It's good to chat with y'all. You guys are distracting me while Seema's trying to tell me what she's been doing. So I
Yeah, put it on the chat room, Bax.
it's their fault, not my fault. I need to respond. I'm not going to be rude to them. I guess I'm quite rude to you now that I think about it. But yeah, thanks chat room. I will catch up with you after the show. And as I said, I'll tell you all about the future of procedurally generated content for Star Wars: The Old Republic. But with that, we can get into rotations, which makes me think of this. Rotations. I needed a little bit of a drop in there. The 80s video for that song is out there, man. It is quite 80s.
Is it?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The lead singer looks like, it's a bit like very Boy George ish almost, and then like they've all got the 80s hair, and it's that British rock, pop rock 80s, not full hairband, but more like the experimental. It's pretty wild. Anyway, hard mode. So you want to be Elite Raider. You want to get into hard modes. You want to get into nightmare operations. You want to solo those master mode flashpoints. What do you got to do? Well, there's a few things, and we're going to talk about one of them tonight. And the one that we're going to talk about tonight is a core. We just picked one randomly that we felt like talking about, is rotation. What is a rotation? We're going to explain that. We're going to talk about why of rotations, why male models. We're going to talk about the why of it. We're going to break down how a lot of rotations manifest themselves. This isn't instructional on any particular rotation for a particular class, although we'll use both the healer rotations that Seema uses and my DPS rotations as examples. But we'll talk about like what's an opener and why does that matter? What is a priority versus a rotation for the repeating part of the middle part of how you might DPS or something. We'll talk about that kind of stuff. Then we'll talk about a couple other things that are critical to getting the most out of your rotation in a fight. So let's dive in on that the starting question. Seema, what's a rotation?
Well,
ELI 5, Seema, explain it like I'm 5. Seema, tell
So
me what a rotation is.
I know you
That's
know
my-
this because we talked about
that's
it
my
before,
voice
but
acting for a 5-year-old. all the 5-year-olds are very disappointed in me now. I don't sound like that at all.
there isn't really a rotation for healing.
Yeah,
And your
Right.
response to me when I said that was, nowadays there's not really a rotation for. Anyway, so what is a rotation? A rotation is a set number of abilities and the number that you use and the order that you use them in, and they're usually designed to take advantage of any synergies between the abilities and any cooldowns that you might want to pop at a certain moment. So that's the basic of what a rotation is. But in modern times, it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it, Max?
Right. There are only very few classes, even across MMOs, that have a set rotation. There are still a couple, I would say my Sork is pretty close to a set rotation. You sort of repeat it over and over with some very minor variations. Um, my Merc is more of a priority order, but there's still, as you're doing that, there's this idea that Seema mentioned of synergy. There's certain abilities you need to prioritize, and there's certain abilities you would never use without casting another ability first, or without having a debuff on the boss, or without having a buff that shows up on you, or a certain stack level that you've reached. And I say never, in order to get the most out of your rotation. So when we say rotation, or you look up rotation for your class, it may not be a set rotation. It may be, and most of them have a priority scheme and instruction on where the synergies are, where the things are that build on each other. And some of them can even get more complicated, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But that's what we mean. The reason you need this is because just pressing buttons on your bar, or just lining up all your abilities and pressing them when they light up, has the potential to really like cut your DPS in half, or cut your healing output in half. Like over here, Missile Blast. I would, on my Arsenal Merc, I would very rarely, if ever, use Missile Blast. But if I like had Missile Blast and Explosive Dart and Fusion Missile all lined up here, and I was just like pressing all of my missiles because they look kind of cool, and I did Tracer Missile, Fusion Missile, Explosive Dart, Missile Blast, I would do half the DPS of what I do now if I was doing that all the time. So you gotta think about, and this is how they design your abilities. You gotta and you can discover it for yourself. But why are the abilities what they are? And in your, if you hit K, if you look at the abilities you get along the way and how they buff themselves, and maybe some abilities that replace other abilities, and some of the passives that you get, like here, Barrage at level 60. Tracer Missile and Sweeping Blasters finish the cooldown on Blazing Bolts. This effect cannot occur more than once every 8 seconds. Okay, now I've learned something interesting. I just gained this passive ability at level 60, which means once every 8 seconds, I have the ability for a Tracer Missile to finish the cooldown on Blazing Bolts, which usually has a cooldown of 13 seconds. Okay, well, why did they do that? Why is that interesting? If you look at it, and you do a little bit of math, you see for the resource cost and the time to cast, Blazing Bolts does a lot of damage. Wow, that's a good amount of damage. Now they balance that by saying, well, now there's a 13-second cooldown. You only get to cast it once every 13 seconds. If there was 0 cooldown on Blazing Bolts, you might just only cast Blazing Bolts because bothering to cast Tracer Missile would lower your DPS. However, if you do not cast it now that with the 13 seconds, if you do not cast Tracer Missile and get that proc once every 8 seconds to reset your cooldown, you can't use Blazing Bolts as much as you could. I said another word in there that I think is interesting to add into this conversation of why we're caring about rotations, which is proc. Proc is an old word. It's from the beginning of the invention of video games. Proc is a procedure that gets called behind the scenes in the code, and it often gets called randomly, and there can be like a cooldown when it resets where it's possible for it to get called again. So here, the proc, the procedure or the thing that happens when I cast Tracer Missile, a dice rolls, and if it's been at least 8 seconds from the last time it happens, each time I cast Tracer Missile, a dice rolls, a random number gets generated, and if I, score higher, if I get a crit roll on my 20-sided die, then the procedure gets called to reset the cooldown on Blazing Bolts. That's what a proc is. Procs are mostly represented in Star Wars by the ability of lighting up on your bar. That is a signal that something procced to make either to reset the cooldown or make that ability more powerful, or it did something. Keeping track of what procs what and why is another clue to defining what would make an optimal rotation. Same thing on the healer side, though, right? I'm mostly talking about DPS here. Same thing on the healer side too, Seema, right? The procs and the buffs and that kind of stuff.
Right. So listening to you talk, I hope I just want to say that the point of Max saying all that is not for you to like be writing down all that stuff about how to play um his class. It's just to give you examples or a feeling for it. Then you go for your class and you don't have to figure out all those synergies. They're well worked out by the community and you can
Yes,
read about them in guides. And I know we were going to mention the
and
guides, but
we'll
one of my
talk about them. Yeah.
okay. Um, but yeah, so there's similar things for healing. So like if I just look at my Merc healer, one of my bigger heals, which is called Healing Scan, it has almost a 2-second cast. It's reduced with alacrity, but it's a long cast. But I can cast it, make it an instant cast if I cast Emergency Scan first. Both of those abilities have a cooldown though, so I can only do that so often. But then I have another ability, um, Supercharged Gas, that will make it so that I can cast Healing Scan with no cooldown. So for a few seconds. So it's those things working together. And if you know the mechanics of a fight, then you might know when you aren't going to be able to stand still. So that's when you might save those instant abilities, those instant versions of your long abilities, long cast abilities for the time when you have to be running around.
Yes. So that gets into variations and why priority systems are a little bit more relevant in most cases, and understanding when you want to break your rotation, again, to get the most overall DPS depending on what's going on in a fight. Running your DPS against a training dummy, and we'll talk about this, why you want to do that. You can run the optimal rotation against a training dummy. No good plan survives first contact with the enemy, though. So when you get into actual boss fight, you will find that you can never execute your perfect rotation, even if you've got one or a perfect priority order, because you got to be like running out of the circle and you got to run around or you got to switch targets, and
Right.
understanding how to adjust is also a key part of understanding your rotation.
But one big value of doing it on the dummy is you just keep doing it till you know all your keybinds and you have the muscle memory so that when your brain does decide, oh, I want to do this ability now, your hands just execute it.
Yep. Yep. So when you're like running around and cleansing yourself, and I'm running out of the circle because we're doing Nightmare and Nephra, I can still keep up the DPS in between because I've got that the basic priority rotation down. There's another thing that rotation conserves for Star Wars: The Old Republic in particular, which is your resources. So here for Merc, it's heat. If your heat gets too high over a certain threshold, it starts regenerating slower and slower and slower. If you exceed your heat thresholds, you can end up in a situation where you can't even use any of your abilities and you have to like stand there and do nothing for 10 seconds before you can get back into doing your rotation. That is a huge DPS loss. So the other thing that the rotations, when you look them up, will allow you to learn and figure out is both how to optimize the priority order so that you can fit in even some weaker abilities because they're optimal for your resource, either resource
Hmm.
building or resource consumption, and when to use extra cooldown abilities, extra side abilities that you may not think of as part of your rotation. Like for me, it's this one here called Vent Heat and this one here called Thermal Sensor Override, which don't do any damage, but they optimize my heat management. But I should only be using them in very specific circumstances. I would not want to put them in the middle of a rotation. They're going to be very reactive. Because if I always cast them, then I'm wasting a global cooldown on an ability that is not useful at the time. Now I
So
just brought another phrase in there. So go
I
ahead.
would contrast to that with healing, where managing your resources is really paramount. And so, whatever your like in the case of my Merc healer here, it's Kolto shot that you go back to often, 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 so that you can stay safe from flirting with disaster. Because if you overheat, in the case of Merc, or if you run out of resources and other healers, that's specifically what you don't wanna do. That's not good. So, like, even on my Sage and Sorks, you just weave it in with everything you do so that you never get really low. So,
Yeah.
healing, output, and managing resources, and knowing the fight and knowing what damage is coming, that's all healing is.
See, look there. I burned through all my heat, and I couldn't cast any abilities, and I just had to just sit here while it ticks on down and down and down. It's terrible. Now, I said another thing in there, which was global cooldown.
Oh, yeah.
Here's another key thought, key idea in understanding getting the most out of a rotation and using your abilities. There is a global cooldown, which means, you can see on my bar here, when I cast an ability, you see there's a line that ticks down, which is the time before I can cast another ability. So there's a time window. And there's a setting. You can go into your settings. Let me find what it is.
I do
Controls,
it. I put the number there.
the
You can s
ability action window, queue window. You want to bump up your ability action queue window to something that's appropriate to you. I max it out because I'm used to it. And what this means is, while I can press an ability even one full second before I can cast that ability, and it will
Mhm.
be ready to go, and it will cast as soon as that window becomes available to cast. It queues up the ability. The reason you're doing this is because the global cooldowns is each of these windows when you could cast an ability. So you can think of these global cooldowns, it's like 1 second here, 1 second here, 1 second here. If I cast an ability here and then I just stand around and look at my shoes for 1 second, and then I cast an ability here, versus the other merc standing next to me that casts an ability in each one of those global cooldown windows, they're now doing 50% more damage than I am. 50% more damage if I'm skipping global cooldowns. You need to, as a DPS, not necessarily as much as a healer, although you'll almost always do it as a healer too. As a DPS, you need to be casting an ability every single global cooldown
Mhm.
throughout the fight.
Absolutely with healing, I say it all the time, ABC, always be casting.
Right. So this includes when, hey, we've got 14 stacks on Nephra, everybody's got to run and stack up on the tanks to share the cleave. All right, let's all go run it. Are you still casting a DPS ability on every single global cooldown while you do that? Because you should be, or you'll hit the enrage timer. That's what that means. So global cooldowns, those global cooldown windows are very important. Little twist, there are some abilities that are off the global cooldown. So when you look at your rotations, you'll see a couple things that it says off the global cooldown, do X. Like here, my power surge is not on the global cooldown. So that means I can click power surge even while the global cooldown is waiting for my next ability, and I can do a tracer missile. I can click power surge and click my next tracer missile, and I'll get an instacast tracer missile that starts at the end of the global cooldown of the previous tracer missile, and I used my off global cooldown ability at like a half global cooldown in between. It's
Mhm.
sounding a little it's sounding a little complicated there, but all it
But this
means
is why
is,
you practice on the dummy, because really your fingers learn it.
right, you'll just like flip it in, and you can I can here I hit 6 and 4 real quick. Adrenals. In fact, maybe I didn't even hit my power surge there. I think I did. Adrenals are off the global cooldown. So when you look at the rotations, you read the guides, they'll say things like, and some of them will even put the global cooldowns as like slots. And they'll say, in this global cooldown, cast these two things. You're like, what do you mean cast two things? Well, that's because one's not on a global cooldown. So you can cast it, and then like 0.1 seconds later, hit the other button, and you're almost doing both at the same time, and you get a lot of value out of that. So there's some of these like clicky kind of things like adrenals, some abilities that are off the global cooldown that you need to think about doubling up, which is kind of cool. Finally, one other tricky ability, and then we'll actually show you some rotation stuff. One other tricky thing that gets really complicated is channeled abilities, and then long channel abilities, and the decision on whether or not to let that channeled ability go all the way to its end. And this is called clipping. So for Sorks, when I cast Force Lightning, it takes 2 seconds to cast all of my Force Lightning. There may be reasons I might want to, after 1.5 seconds, do something else that stops my Force Lightning. That's called clipping the Force Lightning. Depending on how rotations work for different abilities, it comes in and out, the need or desire or usefulness of clipping like this. It might be something that shows up in a rotation in lots of MMOs that you might need to keep an eye out for. But that's what clipping means, because what it means is you might get more DPS by letting that go for a little bit and then switching over and doing something else. So keep an eye out for it. There may be reasons to clip some of those abilities. Cool. Let's actually talk about what a rotation looks like, and then we can get into some fun things like single target, multi-target, switching targets, and stuff like that. For my Merc, as an example, and I'll tell you some more complicated rotations. So as I said, for my Sork, it's mostly a set rotation. What I'm trying to do on my Sork is lay down my dots, and immediately after I lay down my dots, because I'm Madness, I'm talking about Madness spec here. And immediately after I lay down my big dot, I'm casting the AOE thing, and I forgot what it's called. But that sets up my dots, and then laying down that my chat room. Tell me what that's called. The main AOE thing. Anyway, that makes all the dots tick bigger and harder. So you go dot dot dot, lay that thing down, and then you do Force Lightning. The big dot. I wish I had it up, because now I can't think of any of the abilities. The big dot has a cast time on it, but if you cast Force Lightning, it can proc to have a 0 cooldown cast of that big dot. That's one of those ones where you kind of have a set rotation, because you do dot dot dot, do my AoE, Force Lightning, use the insta proc on something secondary, Force Lightning. Now my dots are coming back off, needing to be refreshed, and I just procced an insta cast on my big dot, which I would never do the long cast on because I would waste 2.5 global cooldowns. So then I reset, and I just sort of do the same thing over again. So I sort of have like 2 to 3 repeating cycles, and then the dots come off, and I just do it again. And I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again all fight. It's not perfect. There's some extra things that you throw in, but it's kind of close. On my Merc, here is an example. It's more of a priority order. There are certain abilities like Priming Shot here, which puts a burn on the target that needs to be ticking throughout the fight. Because and then it also does a couple other things. Wait, I guess my Priming Shot doesn't do the burn, but it also does the ability to insta-proc the Tracer Missile. But until I have... No, it also does the burn. So you can see it just put... Yeah, my Priming Shot burn dot. Without that burn, I can't cast Rail Shot. You cannot... And see, watch, when that burn goes off, Rail Shot turns gray again. So having that burn going throughout the whole fight keeps the rotation going. Otherwise, I might get myself into a situation where everything's on cooldown, and maybe I've got to do another Tracer Missile or something because I've got nothing else to do, because I can't cast my Rail Shot, which is a big damage ability, because I let that dot drop off. So it's kind of a priority rotation. It's like, this is high priority. Heat Seeker Missile is also high priority. Then you want to get your Rail Shot off. Then you want to get those Blazing Bolts off. Hold off on that Tracer Missile, even though it lit up, until the next global cooldown, because now when you click it, Your blazing bolts just went off, got the insta cooldown reset. Now you can cast them again. So it's more of priority order to keep the dot going. And if that dot is going, then you can do things like your big hitting abilities if they're off cooldown, like heat seeker missiles and rail shot. If not, then you throw in a couple things like tracer missile. And if your heat's building up, you might need to throw in a thermal sensor override or a vent heat, or even in extreme cases, a rapid shots. So rapid shots is your low damage ability that generates no heat. You get a little bit of damage that goes off on the target. It's not terrible. It's much less than the rest of all your abilities. But because it generates no heat, it gives a global cooldown for your heat to drop a little bit, and then you go back to the rest of the priority. Only if your heat is over, is over the first threshold, which is like 20%, 25%, and your vent heat and thermal sensor overrides are on cooldown. So that's kind of the basics. There's more extra things like when would I use my power surge, and when would I click my relic, and when would I click an adrenal. I didn't even mention electronet. There's other things you might be doing, but that's kind of the basics. So when you look up rotation, that's what it might show you. So rotate, 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 priority, priority, priority. How is it looking on the healer side? You're on your Merc right now, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to say after listening to you, don't get too overwhelmed by all the detail. I mean, when you take 2 or 3 things to get down,
Yeah.
I'm never going to cast this unless I have this proc, for instance, or whatever. And when you're healing, you definitely want to take the most advantage of procs, of synergy, but additionally, you also have to make a judgment call on just about everything you do. So it's really important to get the sort of muscle memory down stuff. Like I can tell because I hardly ever heal on my sage or my operative scoundrels nowadays. So when I do switch to them, I'm like, I can tell the difference. Like I'm going, oh, what do I want to cast? When do I do roaming mint? I'm thinking on my Merc, I'm thinking, so I'm thinking of the player. That player needs it. This player doesn't.
Yeah.
This mechanic is about to happen. This one, whatever. You making judgment calls all the time. Like, say the tank is low and a player is low. You might think that's a no-brainer because you want to always keep the tank up. Well, you do, but maybe in this case, depending on what's happening, the tank is going to last, and you have time to heal the DPS player. So
Right.
you heal the DPS first and then the tank. Or say someone's low on health and they have a debuff. You have to decide, am I going to clear the debuff and then heal them, or heal them and then clear the debuff? Because it depends. Is the debuff doing most of the damage, or is something there what the situation is causing the damage? Then yeah, maybe you need to get a big heal off first and then cleanse them. And sometimes a big part of healing too is sometimes you make the wrong judgment call. And
But it's okay. And so
you just
maybe
learn
there's some
from it.
overheal. So overheal's a thing that healers watch out
Well, or
for.
maybe you die too, because like sometimes I've said
Pick
to
the wrong
myself,
one.
yeah, like I can get this done before I have to do this other thing. And sometimes that turns out not to be true. And you learn under which situations that's true and when it isn't true. So
Like
that's why
sometimes
you'll hear
Seema
me say,
thinks, should I heal Max or should I heal somebody else? And she heals somebody else, and that's the wrong decision. So that's what we're saying.
I mean, that's why you'll hear me say sometimes after I die, well, that was a bad judgment call. That was the wrong judgment call. Because, I should have done something else like move.
So healing is very reactive in that way. Tanking is somewhat reactive in that way too. But even with both of those, you're doing something every global cooldown.
Yeah. Always be casting. Like even if you can't think of what you're going to do next, if you're kind of locked in that, what do, just hit Colto Shot.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's going to help
Culto
you with
Shot
meat.
is, even for me as a DPS, is always on my bar. If I'm, if there's phases of a fight where there's nothing to shoot, like the boss disappears and there's no ads, and I will be spamming Culto Shot every global cooldown, because every time I hit Kolto Shot, I get a stack of Supercharge.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll get 10 stacks of Supercharge, and then my Supercharge gas goes off. And
Yeah.
Kolto Shot is a heal. I might also be casting heals on myself just to take a little, in between time there to heal myself up or take some of the pressure off. Every global cooldown, even if it feels like a break in the fight, no, every global cooldown you should be casting something. I cast my heals constantly throughout fights when there's breaks. So yeah.
I mean, even if you lose track of your rotation or you make the wrong ability, if you do something and if you just do something and you switch targets appropriately, that'll be a huge improvement. Just those two things.
Mm-hmm. But to seem as an intro point to this, take it a step at a time. Look at your priority list of priority abilities and focus on the top couple. In fact, I arrange my bars with the abilities focused around what the priority is. Usually there's always an ability that will be like the ability you always come back to, and you sort of spam in between. You're waiting for other things to either proc or cool down. I almost always put that ability on 4. And the reason is that's where my index finger is. So even if I'm pressing E to strafe, I can always pop up to 4, and I can always spam my spam ability. So here I am. I got a tracer missile going on. Then I move a little bit. I got a tracer missile going on. I do some of my longer running, like my dots and stuff that proc once in a while with longer cooldowns. I put on the F keys right above my 1, 2, 3, 4. So I center everything around sort of my index finger, that F3, F4, F5, 3, 4, 5 keys. That's kind of where my bars are laid out with important stuff. And then longer cooldown stuff sort of spreads out from there. So figure out what abilities you need to like really prioritize, figure out where you're going to put them so your fingers can get that muscle memory. And then I use this trick of like centering things around my 4 key and my index finger. I use that trick to build my rotation into the bars for every other class I play. Mm-hmm. So that when I haven't played my sniper in forever, and I go over to my sniper and I go, I have no idea what the rotation is. I kind of like do my merc rotation, and I watch for things to light up, and I spam that 4 key like in between when I can't figure out what to do, and it's it gets kind of close. So it's not bad.
Yeah, when I'm on my Sage, I may not know the healing ins and outs, but I can interrupt and I can CC and I can stun and I can cleanse because all those are on the same button.
Always on the same buttons. One other trick. So we talked about 2 kinds of rotations. The straight up rotation, do these 7, 8, 9 things in a repeating order. The other is a priority order of prioritize these things when this kind of thing procs, or line up these things as best you can. There's one other even trickier kind of rotation, which is the window-based rotation, where you either need to like build up certain kind of stacks or wait for a special ability to come off a cooldown. The Marauder is famous for these kinds of windows. There's a ferocity window on the Carnage Marauder where when that ferocity, when you are able to use your ferocity ability, you start a window where you need to pack in every global cooldown as many as you can of the highest hitting abilities that will consume that ferocity window. What you need to be careful of in those window-based abilities is that's when you want to limit as best you can. You want to like hold off as you lead up to that window, and limit as best you can casting things that will not benefit or will waste that window. So that's when it gets even a little bit more complicated. So you'll hear people talking about, what are the most difficult rotations. That's the kind of thing they're talking about in a difficult rotation, where you need to be like holding off to wait for the window, consuming the window, and then get back into like either a resource building phase or a holding phase where you're waiting for the windows to open back up. So it can get a little tricky that way. And then And then there's what that no good plan survives first contact. There's two other major things that disrupt your rotation. One is one thing that will redirect you to a secondary rotation, which is multi-target. So a whole bunch of ads comes out, or we're fighting Corruptor Zero, and there's 10 robot ads on the field instead of just one that I'm just shooting in the face over and over in a perfect rotation. There's often, I would say almost always, a secondary rotation for multi-target. If you're in a dot class, that dot class often relies on a significant special rotation for you to cast a couple dots and then cast an ability that will spread your dots to the other mobs. So there you need to make sure you get your dots out on a mob that's not about to die. Then you spread your dots, and then you might use a spam ability like Lightning Storm on top of it. Other classes, it's a little simpler. Like for me, I'm mostly just doing Death from Above and Sweeping Blasters. For IO, for Innovative Ordnance, it was a dot spread. I was making sure I got my dots out. Then I did Fusion Missile, which is a dot spread. So the rotation for multi-target is different. What you'll want to also eyeball, though, when you look at when you should use a multi-target rotation and when you shouldn't, there'll usually be a threshold for your class which says, if it's 3 or more targets, or if it's 4 or more targets, and if it's not, then just use your single target rotation as best you can. Oftentimes, it's a 3 is kind of the threshold. So if it's only 2, like Toth and Zorn, or Jarg and Sorno, you may not be using a multi-target rotation. It may never make sense to use Death from Above on Jarg and Sorno. You should be just using your single target rotation on Jarg, for example. And then the other thing that's going to really disrupt your rotation that Simo was already talking about is movement, or boss mechanics, or fight mechanics. You got to run around. You got to run out of the circle. You got to throw in a cleanse, even a self cleanse as your DPS. Or in weird cases, you might need to CC. I might need to use my concussion missile on some random weird ad, or doing this off stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Use my rocket out. You maybe use it twice. That would be amazing. But that kind of thing. Or, even as a DPS, using my my res to res somebody who died. You still don't waste global cooldowns. If you're running around and you need to switch off, or you need to cast a cleanse, I cast my cure on myself, and I get right back into my rotation. I don't miss a beat. I get my priming shot down if it needs to be down, and I don't miss out. And I know this is even more important from a healing perspective, because you're always reacting, right, Sima?
Right, reacting, and there's also an element of proactive, because it's really important to know the fights so that you can have stuff queued up to do when there's going to be group wide damage or extra hard damage on, like a really easy example is the Gree boss Xeno Analyst. Not so much in story mode these days, but that guy comes out of the gate and hits the tank really hard. So right from the very get-go on that fight, you want big cooldowns on the tank. Almost no other fight is like that.
Right.
You have plenty
right.
of time to just, get started, maybe put your buffs out or whatever. But yeah.
Chat room is asking, just in general, which classes are easy, which classes are hard. I'm not an expert in all the rotations. I kind of think like, for me, the basic Sork Madness Sork rotation is pretty easy. As I said, it's pretty kind of like a repeating thing. You're still trying to ensure your dots have the most uptime possible, which can get a little bit tricky. And then in situations where you can do dot spread, it even gets trickier. But that's an easier rotation to me than the window-based rotations, like some of either the Marauder ones, and
Right. I mean, I would say in general,
DPS.
ranged is going to be easier than melee.
Tends to be right. uh, because also for ranged, you tend to need to be less reactive from a positioning perspective.
Yeah. And
Because
you have more time.
you don't have to be up on right on the boss's
And it's
butt the
easier to
whole time.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's yeah.
And then also once you expand out and you get used to it, then as I said, you're going to get into when do you use your click relic, when do you use your adrenal, how do you fit that into a rotation? Should I use my adrenal anytime? No, there's certain optimal times to use the adrenal, or to use my supercharged gas when I get 10 stacks. When I finally get 10 stacks, should I just pop supercharged gas immediately? Maybe. Or maybe I need to wait a global cooldown or two so that I line it up so it goes off, and then I can do my heat seeker missiles and my rail shot, and I'm not just having to do 3 long cast tracer missiles and eating up all my supercharged gas time. So there's some of those kinds of advanced things that you can worry about. Relics, adrenals, even med packs, when you cast those. So keep that kind of thing in mind. So that leaves us to practice. And why are we standing here on the fleet? And what did you see me doing? I was shooting some target dummies. Everybody should get a target dummy on their ship. The Rishi Stronghold has a really cool room where you can get a special target dummy, and you can put a certain level of health on it. You can put certain debuffs on it. We're here on the fleet. We are on the Zyos Shadow. On the bridge deck of the Zyos Shadow has training dummies on the fleet. Get on a training dummy. Use your abilities.
Command deck, but yeah.
Command deck, is that what I said? Yeah, command deck.
Yeah.
Practice your rotation.
And as you can see, I mean, one person came by early on, but nobody else has been here, so
yeah, this one's
have the
pretty.
place to yourself.
In the Rishi Stronghold, there's even a healing target dummy that you can practice your healing rotation on, which is really kind of cool. So keep that in mind. And then when you want to take that next step and really get to what you might need to do for hard modes, and especially for nightmare modes, it's parsing. So what parsing does is you turn on your log in your settings, you turn on combat log, and then what the parser does, like Star Parse is the most common one for Star Wars: The Old Republic. Star Parse watches that combat log, watches everything you do, and will show you your damage per second, or show your healing abilities, show you then at the end of the fight, or like when you DPS the dummy down, it shows you your most used abilities, and you can then get a sense of how well is this working out. And if I change things up, if I think I should do an extra rapid shots or two in the middle of the fight to keep my heat down, well, you could try it out and see what it does to your overall DPS. So parsing is something that often happens. Parsing is also a way, if you really want to be in progression, especially for Nightmare, you can connect all your parsing together as a group and see how is the whole group doing. And you do that for 2 reasons. One, because there might be a group threshold for DPS that the whole group needs to be doing to get the boss down before the enraged timer goes off. You can do the math. The boss has 10 million health, and we have 6 minutes. That means we need to do 10 million damage in 6 minutes. And if we're doing, if we're not doing enough damage per second to hit 10 million in 6 minutes, nothing we do is going to get us past this fight. So now we got to figure out how we up our damage. But you'll also see as a tank, what tank abilities you're using. As a healer, what heal abilities are going out. Parsing becomes a useful tool. If there's multiple specs for you to choose from, you could look at parsing as a way to compare them. Oftentimes, you might hear or read or see on some of the stat pages, here's the top performing spec for my class. Innovative Ordnance, perfectly tuned on a target dummy, edges out Arsenal, by 0.5%, which is kind of the case of where it is right now. However, for the fights that you're doing and the comfort level you have with a spec, you may parse higher on a different spec in a different rotation than you could ever get to having the optimal rotation on a target dummy with the optimal, with the optimal class or whatever. So keep that in mind too. A great player can outperform on any class with any spec. So it's more about learning your rotation, getting every global cooldown done, getting all of the bonuses stacked up and getting the most out of what you can do than it is about having to always pick the best, the most perfect class out there. So
And
keep that in mind
also,
too.
I mean, even if you do parse and you look at it and you say we don't have enough, we're not putting out enough damage to kill this boss. Part of progressing is your DPS will go up as you learn the fight, because as you become better and better at the mechanics, you'll be better and better at target switching, and you'll be better at keeping your mind on your rotation, and the DPS of the group will go up. So yes, practice
You'll
is
know
everything.
when you're going to have a dead spot, when you need to not waste casting your big dot when the boss is going to become immune, and yeah, all that kind of stuff. You sort of like learn the fights. Exactly. A couple sites that I like, and there's a lot out there. But here's a couple sites I like, and I know you like. What's your favorite, Simo? What were you gonna say? I bet it's
It's
this one.
Merlin.
Yeah,
The thing,
that's the one
there's a
I'm
couple
on.
things I really like about Merlin's guides is he writes the guide for one side and a different guide for the other side. They're the same words, but if you're playing Merc, you can read the Merc guide and it uses all the Merc abilities, and it has the icons for all the Merc, and which is the other thing. It's visual. You can see the icons. Um, you don't have to like read it and be like interpreting. Well, okay, for me, because I'm playing on a trooper, that would mean this. No, you can just go read the trooper guide.
Yes,
Um,
he
and
did that
also,
work, which is great, and I really
yeah, he
appreciate
did it
that
for
too.
you. And it's clean and it's well organized. It's a lot of words, but that's okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it's also clean, and it shows you and it says it in the words that whatever side you're on, you can understand. So yeah, Merlin, he's got a great. This is they've got a great set of guides, and here's where you can see. Here's cast tracer missile even while the tank is leaping in, hasn't even yet started the fight. You lead with a cast of tracer missile. Um, then you cast your adrenal off global cooldown and supercharged gas off global cooldown and priming shot. So now we've done 1, 2, 3, 4 in 2 global cooldowns. Interesting. So this is where you're going to learn by like reading through the opener. So here, see here, I'm looking at opener, and then you're going to get to single target priority for mercenary arsenal. So here's the priority. Why is this? Why would you do these in this order? What is the order, and why is it interesting? And there'll be some narrative. So here it is. If it's been more than 8 seconds and you're trying to reset the cooldown on blazing bolts, you might cast tracer missile as your top priority. Otherwise, tracer missile might be your 8th priority, and this is why. So this is what you're learning here. A couple other sites. There's Volk. I think everybody's probably heard of Volk. Volk's got some good guides. Again, Volk's guides have a little bit more of the discussion. You can find them in here. Classes and disciplines guides, and you'll have a little bit more of the narrative of what's going on in these. He doesn't have a detailed guide and a rotation guide for every one of the classes though, so you'll have to sort of dig in and see where that's at. And there's a few other ones out there. Another site that I use personally and I think it's only for Merc Commando DPS is this fight by Jara Merc Commando.
Yeah, I like that one too. I mean, I just like the look of it.
I really like this for our next show or the show after about min max and gearing, and when I do my next stat cast. Because that's really what this focuses on. He also goes into they also go into rotation, but this is very much focused on here's the exact mods you should prioritize, and how to get to exactly 1590 accuracy. and how you can mix, a stim, an augment, and 3 enhancements to get exactly 1590 and not waste a single point that you could be putting into power or mastery, and why that's interesting. But then there's also a rotation in the back here too, and you'll get some guidance on that. So yeah, and there's more out there. There's even old ones off of Dolphy, which are now a couple years old, but still give you some idea of how the classes work. There's quite a bit you can make use of out there, and
Yeah, that is really nice.
you can do it yourself. You can look at it and you can figure out, if you tear it apart yourself. It does take a lot of work because these people are also like doing simulations of what's the optimal of like when to cast what when. But you can get the basics and get very close to an optimal rotation just by hitting K and like reading through this stuff. Why did they do this? Why did they give me this passive called target tracking? What does that do for me? Increases the crit damage bonus of rail shot and heat seeker missiles and priming shot by 15%. Okay, well now those 3 abilities sound pretty important. If the crit damage is increased by 15%, I should keep an eye on them. So you sort of get clues with how the class sort of works out too. All right, Seema. I had fun talking about this. We went a little bit over time. This is kind of a fun topic. I know you have played MMOs and classes where you got to worry about this kind of stuff for for decades now.
I mean,
I have.
the tab target global cooldown style of combat we've both been doing for years and years.
Yeah, 15 years at least. And this kind of understanding of how these systems work translates. It translates across games.
It does.
You would certainly use this. You'll definitely use it in World of Warcraft. You'd use it in Final Fantasy. You use it in Elder Scrolls. There's little bit slight differences. Like Elder Scrolls is many fewer abilities, but there's still synergies. Interesting things. And there's even this is like hard mode. Yes, I know. And anyone who's listening, there are master mode. You're even going to go a step beyond this. There's going to be rotations that have an interplay between different classes and between what the tank and the DPS does and the healers do, and you can get to that level as well.
And they might switch specs between fights and
yeah. But yeah, so hopefully that laid a couple of the basics down there for you, gave you some things to think about, some references to go check out, and you hopefully got some value out of it. If you have a preference for what we might talk about next in terms of, hard mode, should we talk about gear? Should we talk about fight strat and how you learn that and how you figure that out? Should we talk about the team strat, what the interplay is between tanks and healers and DPS when it comes to threat and how threat works in Star Wars: The Old Republic, which is different than other games and very specific, and there's math behind it. If you have a preference on where we should go next, let us know. Write it in the comments on YouTube. Tell us in Discord. Call me on the telephone. Write me a strongly worded letter. Whatever the case might be. Because we're done with this one for now. We'll do another one next week or the week after. But right now, our EPC 376 droid is ready to get this podcast out to all of you out there and make sure you've got this information at your fingertips. For podcast links to see when we're going live, follow me on Twitter at MaxTheGray. And if you know any cool people that should be playing with us or want more information or want to ask questions and interact and hear our voices and just talk to us, have them come find us at aie-guild.org. In the upper right, there's a link to our guild Discord. We are open. We would love to have anyone that's listening. If you're listening to this and you're saying, hey, these are kind of people I would play with, come play with us. We would love to have that happen. We are on Starforge. We have guilds on both the Republic and the Imperial side. Discord's the best place to ask for a guild invite, and we'll get you in to either Star Wars or any of those games that we play.
I promise we don't always talk this much. Well,
No.
actually, yes, we do.
Yes, we certainly do every time. So we are done talking for today, but we will still Talk to you soon.
Later, everyone.